So we have with us Sikyong Penpa Tsering. Thank you so much for joining us. As the Prime Minister of the Central Tibetan Administration, we speak ahead of the 90th birthday of His Holiness. My first question to you is, as the Tibetan community marks the 90th birthday of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, how do you see the journey of the CTA, through all these years, and what's the message that you want to take, to the exiled community going forward?
Now, the last 66 years of His Holiness leadership since coming into exile, or even before that, now it's almost more than 70 years, His Holiness has led the Tibetan movement. There are so many refugee communities, political refugees, and others in this world, but we have become an exemplary refugee community with a fully functional democratic polity in exile. That is all because of His Holiness Dalai Lama. So he led us from the early 60s when we were going through very difficult times, when not even 1 year after coming into exile, having to look after some 85,000 Tibetans that just came out of Tibet, not used to Indian weather, with no what skill whatsoever, and dietary problems and all that. Despite all this, His Holiness decided to introduce democratic system within the exile community because he is a true democrat and a true visionary in that sense. So he was thinking long term. And now, after 66 years in exile, His Holiness devolved his political and administrative responsibilities in 2011. So what he wanted to achieve in the first 50 years, he managed that. And then there was his direct election of the Khalil Tiber at that time in 2001. And then 2011, then you have the Sikyong, my predecessor, served for 10 years, and this is my first term. So His Holiness has empowered the Tibetans to take care of themselves, to look after their cause and take the movement forward. So this is one of the journey looking back 66 years. And politically, His Holiness has always been a pragmatist, looking into the reality of the situation. So His Holiness started thinking about the middle way policy, which we pursue now since 1973. And when you say 1973, that was at the height of Cultural Revolution between 1966 to 76, when Chinese Red Army destroyed everything old inside China and more so in Tibet, and they destroyed more than 6,000 monasteries, and about 1.2 million Tibetans died as a direct or indirect result of Chinese occupation. So based on those realities, whether with the existential problem of whether Tibetans will survive or not as a civilization or as a people, then His Holiness decided to think about this middle way policy, even though Tibet was an independent state. So even now we follow the middle way policy as a solution that's non-violent, negotiated, mutually beneficial solution that would be lasting. Now, if you look at the violent conflicts around the world, you don't know whether you are creating one problem or resolving one problem or creating more problems in future.
Right. And recently we saw the ninth World Parliamentarians Convention on Tibet in Japan. It brought a renewed focus, to some of the issues that you're mentioning. What practical outcomes do you think going forward would be there, from, this global body, and the representation that we see?
Now, the delegates to the conference in Japan were from 29 different countries. So 23 were personally present, and 26 sent many MPs from the 6 countries sent messages. So that's 29 countries in all. And if you look at the resolutions and the action plan and all that, I think the members are very enthused, but they come from different backgrounds, different countries. Some have good, number of supporters. Some are very few. So it's very asymmetrical participation in the World Parliamentarians Convention on Tibet. But what has gone back is that now during, at least, let's say, for the immediate future also, during the 90th birthday of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, there will be many parliamentary delegations coming to Dharamsala to personally wish His Holiness and also take part in some programs in Dharamsala, because we are going to celebrate His Holiness 90th birthday as the year of compassion for globally. So this is just one of the results. And then others, of course, when they go back now, they will try to create as many parliamentary initiatives as possible.
Right. And when we look at the journey of the CTA today, what do you think are the biggest challenges in terms of political recognition, the funding, also the engagement with the young generation, which is today born outside of Tibet?
Now, politically, I think the main challenge is China. If there is a Chinese leadership with a better sense, then His Holiness is now no more asking for separation or independence, and it's addressing the major concern, sovereignty. But in turn, they should give all other freedoms, just as any other, autonomous arrangement have reached around the world. But in Tibet, unfortunately, autonomy is just a name, not in practice. That is why His Holiness is asking for genuine autonomy. So the challenge is mainly coming from China. But from within the Tibetan community, of course, there are proponents of independence seekers, and then, of course, the official middle way policy. So what we have done from the cabinet side is to bring everybody together. We created this platform called WeTag, Voluntary Tibet Advocacy Group, all around the world, because now Tibetans are scattered in more than 27 different countries. So to gain, when His Holiness says middle way, when you say middle, then there are ends to it or polarities to it. So one polarity is the historical status of Tibet as an independent state. So despite China's disinformation, misinformation on distortion of Tibetan history, it's in the past. They cannot wipe it away. And then on the other hand, the other polarity is the current situation of Tibet, occupied Tibet, under the very repressive Chinese government. So His Holiness is trying to seek a middle way there. So that is why, as middle way proponents, now we are saying there should be recognition for the historical status and the current situation in Tibet to gain value for the middle way. And for independence proponents also, if they have to, if they are seeking independence for future, then they have to prove the independence of Tibet in the past and get support from the international community. So we are on the same path as of now. So that is how we try to bring people together. That's politically. And then, of course, one of the challenge here is now most of the Tibetans used to be in India and Nepal. Now the younger ones, majority of them who can give birth and have productive labor are moving out to North America, Europe, Australia, and different parts of the world. So we have cyclical problem with this in schooling and all that. But these are challenges that we have to adapt. Then in the international political scenario, of course, Tibet, the Sino-Tibet conflict or dispute still exists, and the United States government also says it needs to be resolved. It's yet to be resolved, and it needs to be resolved under international law. That is because of the efforts of His Holiness the Dalai Lama over the last so many decades, reaching out to the world, meeting with leaders, and then, of course, being responsible for the other three principal commitments of His Holiness. And now our job is to live up to that expectation, to reach out to the international community now that His Holiness is not able to travel as much as he used to before. So we have to travel more and reach out to governments and then make sure that we institutionalize our relationship with other governments in the free world, where, of course, we cannot reach out to authoritarian regimes. So these are some of the challenges, and then we have to, if during our time and the people who will follow after us, put our mind and effort 100% in it, I'm sure will be able to live up to that. We have to make sure that we don't disturb His Holiness with, mundane, simple things that's going on within the community.
You talk of the challenges, that China poses. We've also seen two new laws, in the US in recent years, Resolve Tibet Act, as you mentioned last year, and of course on, the issue of reincarnation and why the office of His Holiness would be the authority to decide. How do you see this playing out, on ground, and the impact of these two legislations that it can have?
Yeah, right now, I forgot to answer one of your questions, the financial challenges, because the US cut foreign assistance globally, and I like to believe that we became a collateral damage in the whole process. So, politically, the American government continues to give support. There have been messages from Secretary of State Marco Rubio on Tibetan New Year's Day, reiterating his support for Tibet. I wrote a letter to Secretary Rubio, and in his reply to me, that was sent on 10th March purposely to mark the Tibetan National Uprising Day. There also, again, he reiterates U.S. position on Tibet. And other messages from the State Department signify the same thing. And now, during the 90th birthday of His Holiness, there will be a strong representation from the State Department and also from the Embassy of the United States in Delhi. So, but then again, the question is about the funding. So I spent 2 weeks in Washington, D.C. at the Hill, reaching out to the Congress, to the State Department, to the National Security Council. And at that time, we were informed that the review period was extended by 1 month, which means up to May 20th. And then I finished my other tours. And on my way back to Delhi, I met with the U.S. Embassy here because Secretary Rubio, in one of his briefing to the Senate, pointed towards giving more responsibility of the USAID retained funds to the regional offices, which means the embassies. So the embassies are also very helpful, very supportive, but they ask us to be a little more patient. And we as Buddhists, we are patient and we are being patient, but while being patient, we also be active in reminding the stakeholders in making sure that we receive the funding back.
And it comes to mind, when you talk of stakeholders, and actively supporting you, how do you see the relationship over years between CTA and New Delhi? Uh, do you also see this as a chance for New Delhi to step up and come out more in support of the Tibetan cause in different manner at a time when His Holiness celebrates his 90th birthday? And how do you see this relationship also evolving when it comes to concerns that both sides have as far as China is concerned?
I think, yes, you all know Prime Minister Modi ji, when he came into office, he tried to reach out to Chinese government. Xi Jinping was here in India 2 times, in Gujarat and Mamallapuram. So, despite all these, Galwan happened, Ladakh happened, all these things happened. So, the dam on the Sangpo is also happening, which was announced on 24th December last year. So sometimes you believe that India-China relations is taking 1 step forward and 2 steps backward. So we're still watching. It's a very sensitive issue where Tibet has to be involved because Tibet historically has been the buffer between the two most populous nations in this world, China and India. So now there is the yatra happening to Kailash and Mansarovar, so people believe that the relations are improving, but I'm sure Indian government will be very, very careful in each and every step they take, including the BRICS convention that's coming up. So once bitten, twice shy. I think it's not just once bitten, many times bitten. So India will be very, very careful in their dealings with China. Now, our relation, I always said we remain very, very grateful and thankful to the government and people of India, without whom we don't exist. So I'm in no position to advise the Indian government on what they should be doing, because I've always said we have to realize that no country will leave aside their national interest for the interests of Tibet. So our mantra is, how do we align our national interests with that nation's interests, in this case, the interests of India? So I think most of the things we are very much on the same page, and we have a very transparent relationship. And I always say, we have this Tibetan saying, when children have problems, they have nowhere than to go to their parents. So for us, India is our parent.
And we also see, chief ministers of Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh, also Union Minister Kiran Rijiju, planning to visit Dharamshala and be part of the celebrations, for the 90th birthday of His Holiness. Do you see a shift in political messaging by New Delhi as far as the Tibet issue is concerned?
I think, no, all this, for me, it is not a shift. It's a continuation of what has been happening. Maybe there are one or two bumps in between, but otherwise, Indian government has been very generous. And Kirin Rijiju is also a Buddhist. So, and he follows His Holiness, so he will be present as a minister and also as a Buddhist. And the Arunachal chief minister, you already know, he's the only chief minister in India who says we don't have a border with China, but we have border with Tibet. And the Indian government still calls Indo-Tibetan Border Police and Indo-Tibetan Border Force. So, and Sikkim Chief Minister, the Honorable Goleji, Prem Singh Tamangji, and then we also have the Hill Council from Ladakh, all the members of the Hill Council and the chair. So this, and we are not able to invite other leaders from the Himalayan states and states where Tibetans are living. We do have Home Minister of Karnataka also coming for the program. So this shows how close we are with the Indian government and with the Himalayan states, with whom we share very close cultural and religious ties. And their wish to be present also signifies the importance they attach to His Holiness 90th birthday. And I think from the central government also, His Holiness has always been a revered guest in India. So I think it sends the right signal. But some ask the question as to why we are not inviting Himachal Chief Minister this time. So I personally reached out to Honorable Chief Minister Sukhinder Sukhuji and told him that we have very little space in front of His Holiness residence. We are going to hold the program. It's rainy season, so we can't accommodate when we mark the Human Rights Day. So also we will be inviting other delegates, and I also mentioned about many parliamentary groups or congressional delegations coming to Dharamsala in the next year to come.
And how do you see, Dharamshala continuing to grow as the nerve center of the Tibetan struggle? What steps is the CTA taking to strengthen it? Also, you have the exiled community spread across the globe, and it's only increasing. How do you bring them to Dharamshala and make them, a part of what CTA is doing in India?
Now, for the general public, in my capacity as Sikyong, I promised them that I will visit every community 2 times in 5 years Now about 80% of it I finished. First round I finished already. Second round I finished almost 80% now, 20% left. So this is how we try to reach out to Tibetan communities worldwide, even though we are becoming physically distant, to be emotionally close. So those visits are very, very important to the internationally as well as within India. I visit every single Tibetan settlement because we are spread across 37 locations in 10 different Indian states and 2 union territories. So it's quite a task. But then earlier, His Holiness used to travel, and wherever His Holiness goes, all the Tibetans gather, so it's not a problem to keep the community together. Now we have to work doubly hard to reach out to the public and make sure that the CTA and public are on the same page. They know exactly what we are doing. But even our social media is very active. Sometimes not very good, but majorly there's a lot of information within the Tibetan community social media that spreads worldwide. And as I mentioned earlier also, that we are trying to institutionalize all our relations with other countries so that whoever comes after us can retain the same similar positions or maybe even seek more visibility in the future.
And at this juncture, when you look at the future of, the Tibetan movement, what is it that one thing that gives you the most hope? And what would be your message also to the Tibetan community in exile? The new generation that is born outside today.
Mm.
What would be your message to them?
The hope is definitely the youth. So I also mentioned about the voluntary Tibet advocacy group. That's meant for every Tibetan, but so far 750 to 800 Tibetans have registered worldwide. And every year we organize this International Youth Forum. And there, of course, there's so many workshops and immersion programs and all that for Tibetan students who are born in Europe, North America, Australia, and others. So we created this platform. If we can train 100 leaders in 1 year and continue that for 10 years at least, we have 1,000 leaders. And most of the participants are between the age of 20 to 30. And if they live for another 40, 50 years, then we have leadership for the next 40, 50 years. That is what we are trying to achieve and attempt, because what we are today is because of the generation that came from Tibet and worked very hard under the leadership of His Holiness. Now it is our job, if we are not able to resolve the Sino-Tibet dispute in a short period, in the near future, then we have to continue this with the younger generation who, when I travel around, I make it a point to meet with them separately and talk to them. And we are supposed to encourage them, but sometimes they inspire us with their attendance and interests.
And as you explained the middle way approach, what would be your reading meeting, all these young, your next generation? There is also a certain element who would still talk about independence, who still talk about preserving, their culture, heritage, as well as the territorial integrity of Tibet. How do you see addressing their concerns and the middle way approach being, going forward, the only way that would resolve this?
Now, concerning culture, Tibetan language, because we have a language that came from India, as you know, the script came from Devanagari script, and Tibetan language is now one among the 15 oldest languages in this world. So Tibetan Buddhism also came from India, from the Nalanda tradition. So we consider, and we have transcribed every available Sanskrit and Pali text from 8th to 13th century before Buddhism almost vanished out of India. And we are proud to be a repository of one part of ancient Indian wisdom. So this and the culture part and the environment part and way of life, it's similar, which is there's no difference between independent seeker and middle way, but the younger ones are driven to this desperation because Chinese government is not responding uh, well to the middle way so far. But of course, we find nothing wrong with middle way. That's the only way to go forward. So those things will always be there. So what I mentioned about WeTag is one platform where independent speakers, middleware proponents, everybody can come together. When they get advocate, they can all go together. First, explain about the middle way, which is the official position, why His Holiness proposed that, why the Parliament approved it, all that. Then you can say, I personally want independence, or my organization seeks independence for future. I see no harm in that, and we don't need to be so divisive in this. That is why we created this WeTag platform where everybody can come together, and I think it's helping already because WeTags are becoming now more active in different countries because now they have become nationals there. They speak the language, they understand the system. If they understand a little more about China, a little more about what's happening inside Tibet, then Tibetans for Tibet at the front line could be the best and the only way to go forward in the future.
And when we, the big question is, the reincarnation issue. How do you see addressing the concerns of Tibetans who would want, His Holiness legacy to continue? What would be that you expect, in the year-long celebrations, this year, to be able to address this concern of people?
Now, first, of course, everybody is using these two words, succession and reincarnation, alternatively. And now if you talk about reincarnation, um, this is a subject which is very religious, very traditional in its process, and this can be decided only by the High Lamas. Now, in this case, His Holiness the Dalai Lama himself is going to be reborn. Before talking about this, the whole question is so far. If you look at the September 2011 document, that is the only available document on His Holiness reincarnation way back in 2011. His Holiness has not even decided, because sometimes he says, I could be the last Dalai Lama. So His Holiness has not even accepted to reincarnate right now. So there is also the question of the continuation of the Gandem Podang Trust, which is the management of the family of His Holiness in the monastic sense. So first, that is why what we have been doing, we have been the collecting, people have been sending from people from all walks of life, people, organizations, associations, monastic centers, everybody has been sending letters to the private office over the last several years for His Holiness to reincarnate first, to accept to reincarnate first.
Do you also see this as an opportunity for the Indian government, or is there a need for the Indian government to come out in support, just like, the US has done, to say that it's up to the office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to decide on his reincarnation? Do you think there is a need for a statement like that from India?
Now, through this year, we will be working on governments to get more statements, policy statements on where they stand on religious freedom and reincarnation. I don't want to go ahead of time, but you will hear some from some countries, not necessarily India right now, but we all know that India will be on the right side of history.
Thank you so much. Thank you for speaking with the week.
Thank you, Namrata. Thank you.